A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongu Shampagi. We are coming out of a week that's been heavy on news, especially the police being in the spotlight or on the spotlight, under the spotlight, for allegations of torture. One of those incidents is the gruesome images we saw of the chairperson of Kamwenge Town Council, which some people are calling him, referring to him wrongly, but I know at that level, that political level, the usage of the title mayor is largely accepted, but he is the local council 3 chairperson for Kamwenge Town Council, and the images we saw of him injured, especially around the knees, around the arms, and around the ankles, which has dominated a lot of the news. The testimonies of the suspects in the Kawesi murder, who also showed scars. Some of them appeared fresh. The denials from the police, and but the other bigger story, one of the other bigger stories, what has been the rising prices of food commodities, especially sugar. And I think now we're talking between 6,000 if you go in an established supermarket or grocery store, to as high as 8,000, and that is around Kampala, but the prices could vary significantly elsewhere in the country. But we have also been seeing that the food prices have been going up. One of the most dramatic and most amazing is a food crop that majority Ugandans do not consider as a staple, but has been emerging. We thought maize flour was only for students, secondary school children in school, for prisoners, and largely that's where they used to eat maize. But it has been finding its way to dinner tables of many Ugandans, and it's largely become a staple, and that maize meal has dramatically risen to such an extent that today a kilogram costs about 2,800 to 3,000 shillings. And there's a lot of competition for people coming to buy from Kenya, where it is a staple, Tanzania, South Sudan, and elsewhere. But the bigger question to ask about all this is to ask, who is in control of Uganda's economy? Who owns it? What is Uganda's economy? To help us locate ourselves in increasing prices of food, increasing prices of fuel, and other things, and whatever is available in individual people's pockets, how much they earn and how much they steal, is determined largely by who owns the economy. So to discuss that rather difficult topic, let me start by introducing Moses Kisa. Moses Kisa teaches at Northwestern University in the United States. Dr. Kisa, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles. It's always a pleasure being back here on the Fourth Estate, and thank you for inviting me.
Onapito Ekomloid works with one of the biggest private companies in this country. One of the biggest, they entertain people, they make people happy.
That is our claim to fame, which we are proud for.
Onapito is Corporate Affairs Director at Nile Breweries AB InBev, but also a panelist on the Fourth Estate since it started. And let me also introduce, coming, I think, we haven't had you a lot here.
But I've been here.
You've been here, yes, but we haven't had you a lot. Professor John Jean Varier teaches law at Makerere University. Very nice to have you, sir.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.
Let me just add one thing. In a country that is so dry of think tanks, another think tank was launched just this last week. I think on Thursday. Was launched on Thursday, and that think tank is called it's quite a bit of a mouthful. Society for Justice and National Unity, SOJUNO. Professor is part of that. Moses Kisa is part of that.
Professor is actually the chairman, and I'm the secretary.
Yes. I did speak during the week to Mr. Ndevesa. He's part of that.
That's right.
And I was joking with Mr. Ndevesa because many years ago, him with Professor Varia and a few others started another think tank. I don't know what happened to it.
The free movement.
The free movement.
Yes.
I don't know what happened to it.
It is still there.
It accomplished what it was set out to do, and I think it naturally went into limbo because it had accomplished.
It went into abeyance.
Yes,
not into limbo.
The primary and Professor Varia will be most qualified to speak about the free movement, but I can just quickly say, from what I know, the free movement was started in the late 90s as part of the broader effort to push Uganda back to multi-party politics, to pluralistic politics. And I think that was accomplished, at least on paper, with the constitutional return to party politics in 2005.
I'm trying to locate where you were in the 1990s, late 1990s.
I was in secondary
because
school.
It became more pronounced around 2000, heading to 2001?
Yes.
Professor, what happened to the free movement? Where is it?
Well, we did not dissolve it. It is in abeyance, but as Moses has said, as far as we are concerned, the primary objective of the free movement was achieved when the country returned to multi-party politics and freedom of association, not on paper, but in law. Now, that is different from saying whether we have a functional multi-party politics or multi-party system. That's a different, it's a different struggle. And in fact, you must look at these struggles in phases and in different ways, because you need a legal provision for certain things to become legitimate. But that does not mean that the struggle is over. For instance, if we had a constitution in 1962 that declared us independent, that was legal and constitutional. But the actual independence of the people of Uganda from control from foreign forces and foreign interests does not necessarily automatically become accomplished because you have a constitutional or legal provision. Yes.
Okay. Just quickly, let's use that to link to the this Society for Justice. Moses, what is this? What is this animal now?
Sure.
What is it supposed to be struggling for? Sure. If the free movement achieved its objective and went into abeyance, what is this Society for Justice and National Unity?
Again,
but before Moses comes in, I would be very surprised if he did the free movement so multi-party as an end, or the legalization, or re-legalization of multi-party as an end. Because I believe it was seeing NRM not just as a non-party system, but also as something that was not desirable for Uganda. At least we are old enough to kind of study the kind of sentiment that the free movement stood for. Some people think you actually failed, or to use the NRM to say you are defeated like many political forces and you just went to sleep.
Well, I don't know. Even if you assume, by the way, that we could have been defeated in one war or the other, but political struggles don't have specific endpoints, and it is a process. And actually, from 2005 to date, all of us that were involved in the free movement have been active still, not necessarily through the free movement. We have been still contributing to the struggles, the politics of this country, and we shall continue to do so in different ways. Whether we use the free movement or some other form is neither here nor there. But to say that what we stood for was defeated is really...
We don't want to get to
let's not go into the free movement.
Charles, so you had asked me what...
We'll have an opportunity to discuss the free movement and what happened to it, whether it was defeated
or not.
Or it went into abeyance.
Or whether it was an attempt by academics to reclaim their space in the political discussion, the political discourse, and whether they achieved that or not. But let's talk about this Society
for Justice and National Unity. Again, my senior colleague, Professor John Barrier, will be able to elaborate on a few things, and I'm going to just quickly say one or two things that some of us who are, based in academia a few years ago thought that it was important to come together and form a forum through which we can collectively contribute towards shaping national, political, social debate and contributing to the common good for the country called Uganda. And we thought that for a long time people in the academia had sort of abdicated the responsibility for providing dispassionate, objective and critical analysis of the day's key questions for a country like Uganda. And so the think tank we founded, which as I said was registered a couple of years ago, but we formally launched it on Thursday, is intended to provide that forum of harnessing the intellectual resources of the country by bringing together people who are based in different universities, but especially starting with our premier university, which is Makerere University. So Sojunu, as we call it by way of acronym, brings together a number of people who are in Makerere, like Professor John Jean Baria and Mr. Mambu Shandebesa, who you mentioned earlier. But we intend to also reach out to colleagues who are in other universities around the country.
Now, let's move straight to the question, the topic of discussion today, and ask the question: can you answer that question? Who owns Uganda's economy?
Well, I guess you can answer the question in different ways. Last night we had Dr. Fred Muhumuza here on the news, the Talk of the Nation. I should say that Dr. Muhumuza had been the key speaker at the launch of our think tank on Thursday, and he addressed in a paper he presented that very question of who owns Uganda's economy. Now he was able to walk us through different segments of the economy and point out what does agriculture contribute towards Uganda's GDP, what does services contribute, what does manufacturing contribute, and so on and so forth, and what are the key players in those different sectors of the economy. We know that agriculture contributes a very...
Is the question what are or who are? Or who are the key players? Which is which?
Both. Yeah. So what is the structure of Uganda's economy? And who are the key players in those different sectors of the economy? And more importantly, I think what we sought to interrogate more closely, what does that mean for the present and the future of the country? If the economy is structured in a certain way where, for example, citizens have very limited stake and control, what implications does that have for long-term social and political stability for the country? And what does that mean for social justice, for inclusion, for the overall well-being of the country? Those are the kinds of questions.
For a country like Uganda, Professor, if you could, Onal, before I come to Professor, for a country like Uganda, how do you answer a question like who owns Uganda's economy? Because the models where this question has been asked and effectively been answered, you look at the South African model emerging out of apartheid. White people in charge of that country for many years took control of the economy. You have seen the growth of Julius Malema and his Economic Freedom Party. You move just up north, Zimbabwe, many years under white rule, then they ejected, and the struggle is, no. The white people control the land, black people don't control the land. To readdress that, you need to bring them in control. Move neighboring Kenya. The highlands, more fertile, are occupied by the countries, the colonialists. I mean the people who came into the country because of colonialism. So the structure was shaped by colonialism. If you move even further, Russia, for example, you go into a privatization process, sell the country's oil companies, sell them to Russians who are lucky to get them at that time, and you create what you call oligarchs. Now, if you're trying to answer the same question for a country like Uganda, is there an easy answer for that?
Of course, Charles, there are no easy answers. Unfortunately, Uganda had the benefit of debating this question almost soon after independence. I think the obsession has always been to suggest that if non-Ugandans own, then it's bad. But for me, I think the real question is who benefits from an economy, or who benefits from Uganda's economy? That should be the question that should always be asked. We had the beautiful experiment of Idi Amin. In fact, there has been a clip doing rounds in some of the social media of Amin justifying his economic war, taking out the Asians and putting our fellow Ugandans in charge. And of course, I think there's consensus that it was a disaster. Much as the intention was noble, at least in the short term or medium, it didn't work. So to me, I'm not a big fan of the obvious suggestion in this question is that Ugandans, as citizens, if they own the economy, then automatically things will be okay. I think the size of the pie is even more important. Because if by having Ugandans as owners, the size of the pie does not increase, it won't solve the problem. You need, first of all, to make sure the size of the pie is increasing, regardless of who owns. What, for example, if there is a big company like the one I work for, which is generally perceived to be a foreign company, you have to wear what we call share of the bottle. When we sell a bottle of beer, who takes what? And of course, government is the biggest shareholder in that bottle by way of taxes.
Shareholder or stakeholder?
I mean, it's almost, you can use the word shareholder loosely and say government is the biggest shareholder by way of taxation. And then you have to see what do employees get? What do suppliers of any raw materials get? What do the people in the distribution process of beer?
Those who grow for you a purple.
If you don't analyze those small details, it's easy to conclude that this is a foreign company, so Ugandans have no benefit in it. So there are no straight answers. To me, the most important thing is who benefits from an economy, regardless of who owns. Because if you have a Ugandan owning a business which is failing, cannot employ fellow Ugandans, as it has been seen in many cases, it's as bad as having a foreigner owning and failing.
Okay. Professor, you chose this topic to be the first, the launch topic of your think tank.
Yes, we did.
What is it you intended to achieve, and how would you answer? What kind of answer comes out of this? What I think is a very broad question.
Well, maybe three things. The first one is that who owns and who controls an economy is the basis of determining everything else. It will determine the kind of politics that you have and in whose interest that politics is constructed and played out. It will determine whether people have rights or not. It will determine very many things. So that is important as a starting point for our organization in asking who owns and who controls this economy. The second reason why we chose it is that over the last 50 years, we have gone through different experimentations. We began with Africanizing the economy and government in Obote 1. Then we moved to the period of nationalization, both by Obote 1 and more so by Idi Amin. Then we come back to an uncertain period of structural adjustment, in which the main argument was that the control by the state over the economy, having public enterprises, was not correct. But it was a half-hearted argument until the end of the Cold War. Now, with the end of the Cold War, it appeared as if the ideological arguments had been settled.
Help a viewer with those time bands, because SAPS begin early 1980s.
Yes.
With Obote 1.
With
Obote 2.
Obote 2.
Yes.
And Obote 2 is doing SAPS alongside fighting a war in Luero.
Yes.
But then we realized the structural adjustment program, the actual implementation comes in once President Museveni takes over in 1986. And you see a lot of that in the 1990s.
Yes, in fact, with the coming in power of NRM, there was an attempt at reversing policy because the NRM believed, it was a left-wing organization, it believed very much in state control, and in fact even wanted to move away from the money economy by going through barter trade. But that was a short-lived period. What happened was that with the end of the Cold War, the NRM was transformed. And it made an about turn, and hence we now had this neoliberalism, privatization, and opening up the ownership of state enterprises for private people. Now, what happens with privatization is that whereas the idea was that you remove the inefficiencies of state enterprises and you put this into private, efficient, market-driven private sector, what happens is that the biggest factors of the economy are then now handed over to foreigners. Whether you talk about the banking and financial system, whether you talk about the petroleum industry, or the major areas of production and services are now taken over by foreigners. In fact, Ugandans take over the list available, and then with the retrenchment of people from both government and the public enterprises, the Ugandans now do not actually have jobs. The jobs that they have are actually mainly very poorly paid jobs. Only very few people have jobs that you could call substantial jobs. Either they are casual workers or they are temporary workers. So this is the kind of economy that is constructed after privatization. And in fact, if you look at government thinking today, they seem to be regretting. They are saying the things that we privatized, maybe we should bring them back. We should bring back the cooperatives. We should bring back Uganda Airlines. Uganda Railways was given to Rift Valley Railways. They have never done anything. Okay? So there is a rethinking that maybe the privatization has not achieved what it was intended to achieve. But, to answer the question, yes. I think, who owns Uganda's economy? That question can be answered. Okay? I think those who say that it cannot be answered, they are giving an answer that is intended to refuse a proper answer to be given.
You're becoming academic there.
No. Because the economy is something measurable. Not so. It is something measurable. It is not something imagined. You can go into sectors, just say sector by sector. You say in agriculture, in industry, in services, who is in control?
Okay.
That is measurable.
Can we answer that question?
The question can be answered. Yes.
Can we answer that question after a very short commercial break? You're still watching the Fourth Estate, and that question is actually a difficult question to answer. Some of the argument is, who cares who owns the economy? What does it matter? Ona's argument, Onapito's argument is who benefits from the economy.
Is more important.
Is more important.
And I was saying, Charles, that you see, that is important, but you can't decouple who owns from who benefits. I think that...
Why can't you?
No, but you see, who benefits very much depends on who owns. Okay? You see...
Let's break it down.
Yep.
To the most basic that we can find.
Sure.
No, just a moment. A Ugandan called Mukasa owns a business downtown in Chikuvo. His turnover, daily turnover. When you hear people in Chikuvo talking about Inaya Mitwalo Kumi, you may think they're talking about 100,000 shillings. They're talking about possibly $100,000. And $100,000 is about...
It's close to $1 billion shillings.
Today?
Actually, $1 billion shillings, yes.
$100,000?
No, it's about 360.
Yeah, about 360 million.
Yes,
about 360, 370 million Uganda shillings.
Yeah.
So someone has made that money during the day. There are women whose job has been from morning up to night to sort the money. Get 1,000 shillings, put them on the corner here. 2,000 shillings, put them in another, raise another pile here. 5,000 shillings, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. He goes through the numbers, ties up the bundles, and calls someone who runs the Forex Bureau downtown and says, buy me Mitwalo Kumi. So he gets a cleaner bundle of $100,000 US. Either walks with it home, takes it to the bank, but is paying these people who have been doing the sorting of the money.
Right.
Maybe 5,000 shillings for a day. Then the people have been picking and loading stuff from the store onto lorries going to DR Congo, going to Rwanda, going South Sudan. Some of them actually going back to Kenya, where things are supposed to be coming from. He's paying them a miserly for every load carried.
Right.
And you have an Onapito here who works for a multinational. And the multinational pays and says, one, apart from your salary, you have medical benefits, you have retirement benefits, you have ABC. Does it matter who owns the economy? Yes.
Well, Charles, it does matter because, you know, when you have key sectors of the economy controlled by, say, multinational corporations or foreign capital, it means that there will be very little investment happening. It's not guaranteed that, you know, the profits will stay here. Most likely, multinational corporations are always looking for where can they find the best returns on their capital. So whatever profit they'll be making in an economy like Uganda, they will find somewhere else where they can invest it and get higher returns if the returns in Uganda are low. The Ugandan investor may not have that much of an alternative to say, well, I'm going to find investments in Ivory Coast where I'll put my money. They will most likely, be inclined to invest here.
It looks like you haven't heard of the stories of people accessing money, not because they're doing business, but possibly accessing public funds and going to build apartments in in exclusive neighborhoods of Nairobi, of Arusha, of Dar es Salaam, of South Africa.
But you see, I actually did not want to kind of trivialize this question and reduce it to, is it foreigners or Ugandans? You see, the issue is not whether foreigners or Ugandans. The issue is what is the structure of the economy and who owns what and what implications does that have for the country's social.
So what answer do we have for that?
You see, I think that for the most part there is economic exclusion. That is, for me, the more important thing. That you have, for example, agriculture, which is the one sector of the economy where the majority of Ugandans depend. And agriculture contributes a paltry share to the overall GDP of the country and has been having very low growth, in fact negative growth for certain years. The growth that has been happening in the Ugandan economy has been in services. And what are the services companies? You have the banking sector, and we know that the majority of the banking sector is run by multinational corporations. You have the telecom industry, which is another big player in the services sector, and we know that there is barely a local Ugandan player who is in the telecom industry. So it means that you see there has been growth of Uganda's GDP, which is commendable for quite a long time. Where has that growth been happening, and who has been benefiting from that growth? It doesn't surprise you that we have very, very high unemployment, okay, especially youth unemployment. We have people who are still living in very, very impoverished conditions, never mind that there has been growth for a long time. Officially we are told that 19% of Ugandans live below the poverty line, and that is $1 per day. If you increase that, if you double to $2, and you ask yourself the difference between $1 and 2. If you increase it to $2, it's going to more than double. Okay, actually it's going to be like around 31-32%, so slightly less than double. Okay, if you actually tripled it, if you said how many Ugandans live on $3 a day, then you're going to find that actually more than 70% of Ugandans live on...
And $3 a day is about
10,000 shillings.
10,100, 11,000 shillings.
Right, yeah.
But let me use your example of the trader in Chikubu who is exploiting Ugandans, and maybe some multinational company that is not
I don't think it's
that is not exploiting some of its
just failing to pay better, not exploiting.
no, it is exploitation. That's what it means. Obviously, that's the meaning.
If you know that there is a need to pay better and you don't pay better, you exploit.
You're exploiting. So anyway, the point is this: this is a capitalist economy, and therefore it runs on the principle of a group of people using labor, using capital for purpose of making a profit, which is okay. Let's start from there. Now, if you want this trader to pay his or her workers better, 2, if you want this trader to invest in production because he is now making a lot of money, or 3, if you want this thief, somebody who has stolen the government money and is building houses either in Cape Town or in Dubai. If you want that thief to invest in Uganda, you should have a policy framework that allows him or her and that Chikubo person to move. Because you see, when you make a lot of money, it doesn't make sense to keep it. Capitalism doesn't work like that. Unless you expand and invest, you will still fail. So the logic of capitalism is that you should be able to invest and expand. Now, that can only happen if there is government policy that allows people who make this money to actually invest it. And then once they have invested it, once you have many of these doing this business, you can actually regulate them. And therefore, they will be able to follow the labor laws, they'll be able to provide social security for their workers, etc. But the problem now is that the government has allowed both foreigners and Ugandans and thieves to have a lot of money and to use it in any manner that they wish. And so that it is both not simply a question of whether we have a foreigner doing business or a Ugandan doing business, but what is the political framework? It is a political question. Where do you want these people who are making money to direct this money? That one must be through public policy.
Doesn't that go contrary to a free market economy?
But that's the point we are making, that there is no country that has ever developed by saying this is a completely free market, free economy, and that foreigners and locals will be taken on the same footing. No country has ever.
So Charles, I think that the real challenge that the doctors are pointing out is maybe the one of regulation. Proper regulatory framework to allow both local and foreign investment. But for me, I believe this economy needs deeper externalization, contrary to this notion that Ugandans should have more, because it requires a huge injection of capital into it, you know, which we don't have, you know. So you need people who have money, and there's a lot of money out there in the world. So long as that money can see that it will make profit here,
and then NSSF has a lot of money.
Fine, but
NSSF is alone. It's a singular entity that has a lot of money.
And it's
I would not be worried, again to emphasize, if you had more foreigners bringing money to this economy to create particularly jobs, and to create, first of all, markets which can be both external and internal. And especially the external market require very high quality standards, and it may require businesses that are already operating elsewhere in the world and whose products have already been vouched by the markets to come and be in this market for you to actually reliably exploit the external market.
But the point is,
if you want to try and penetrate the external market using truly domestic capacity, you may not.
No, but this is not either foreign or local. We are not saying that there should be no foreign participation in our economy.
But I was saying that is exclusion by who?
No, but you see, even if you want, for instance, a multinational company which already has these international networks, blah, 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 you must have a process in which the locals can learn, can participate, or you share, like many other countries do, whether it is Tanzania or even Kenya. They did not fully liberalize and open up their market. So the question is,
even have a better situation whereby you have locals also do their thing.
Sure.
Not necessarily saying because now there's a foreign company, like they do in Zimbabwe, so part of the share must be given to nationals, almost like.
No. It is not. I mean, you can have various methods of doing it, and one of them is for the government to specifically empower local people to do certain things which are not even done by foreigners.
Let's go back to where we began.
Which is not happening.
Let's go back to where we began from. And part of the discussion that Dr. Muhumuza had yesterday on Talk of the Nation, which is, are we able, or this paper, for example, are you able to stratify and say, agriculture, for example, is controlled and owned majority by 68%. The 68% Ugandan peasants, it contributes so much to the economy, but employs so many, because that's the argument that has been there about agriculture. Right. It contributes so little to the GDP, but employs the majority. So you look at what kind of investments government is making in the agriculture sector. Then you go to the services sector, telecoms, the banking sector. Telecoms take a lot of their money out of this country. They make billions, they make lots of money in profit annually, but take the money out of the economy. How do you control that? Are you able to, have you been able, Professor, to go through these different sectors of the economy, analyze them, and locate who is in control of what, and who benefits how?
I think this is an ongoing process, but the initial work by Dr. Muhumuza and others has been done. What you have said, for instance, agriculture, that's where most of our people are, and it is the least developed. The financial services, insurance, telecom, the petroleum industry, all these are controlled by foreigners. So some of those, there's no doubt about it. Now, there are some new and upcoming trends in terms of the investment as well as the loans being given by the Chinese. We need to study the trend and see what impact, for instance, is the Chinese investment and Chinese lending having as an impact on the Ugandan economy, because the kind of borrowing that we are doing overall, if you look at the debt repayment schedules annually, we are informed that about 30% of the budget has to go into debt repayment.
Yes.
Now, if you are not careful,
actually, in the last budget,
yes,
before we read this budget,
okay,
the last budget provided, I think it was a 27 trillion budget. Out of that money, 6 trillion, about 6 trillion, was earmarked for debt repayment.
Yes.
Yes, both external and domestic.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm saying that even we have to borrow. There's no way that we can.
Borrowing is not bad.
Yeah, borrowing is not bad. We have to borrow, but you have to look one at the level of sustainability of the debt. That is why a few years ago we had to be forgiven, although it didn't help us much.
We went through 5 cycles of debt forgiveness under the highly indebted poor countries.
Yes. So if you are having an unsustainable debt, you are actually mortgaging the country.
Just wait a moment.
Yes.
If you have an economy that is as small as this economy, the presence where we began from, I gave examples. The South African economy for many years controlled by white South Africans, and there's a problem because under apartheid, it worked to the exclusion of majority black South Africans.
And that exclusion has continued.
Yes, it has continued.
Yeah.
The ANC government, when they came in 1994, tried to correct that by creating the black empowerment. Black empowerment. Yes, it's made some black people successful because they have put some conditions that require either co-ownership of companies and a bigger share, especially of government intervention, going to black people. If you go to the Kenyan economy, you'd find the structural disruption. In the Ugandan economy, you have looked at that in the 1970s, when Amin tried his, what did he call it?
Economic war.
Economic war.
His economic war. But for an economy structured like Uganda's economy, you can count the multinational companies that we're talking about on 2 hands.
Right.
And you almost be done with all of them. Be it in the banking sector, or the services sector broadly, or elsewhere. Is this an economy? Is this an economy that should give Ugandans sleepless nights on who controls it?
True, I think so.
Has it arrived
Charles,
there?
you know, Ona earlier was asking, I mentioned the issue of exclusion, and he was asking exclusion by whom? You take the banking sector, for example. There is no country that can transform without a strong banking sector and without access to credit and affordable credit. One of Uganda's biggest problems today is access to affordable credit. Many people are choking on loans they can't pay because credit is incredibly expensive in this country.
But also many Ugandans are incredibly irresponsible with their borrowing.
That is true.
And their money usage.
That may be true,
No,
but for me that's
more seriously, the experts have said the interest rates are high because we have a lamentable saving culture.
right.
So
But when you compare
interest rates.
I think the issue why interest rates have been very high in this country is because the Bank of Uganda has insisted on a conservative monetary policy of squeezing the supply of money so as to control inflation. Now, Governor Mutebi,
that argument is quite debatable. We've seen local banks go belly up when we thought they were doing well. You have examples. The latest is Sudiro Parelia's Crane Bank.
Was it operating like a bank?
what was it operating
I
by?
think it had its own internal problems.
Even if
we
it had
don't
its
know,
own
we
internal
don't know
problems,
much
one
yet.
of the major arguments is Cranbank went belly up because it had very unsustainable
True.
loans.
Yeah. There was a lot of
Yes.
Yeah, but you
look at
see,
years before that.
that one, don't blame even Ukraine Bank. Blame Bank of Uganda,
the supervisor.
the supervisor, that must have been seeing the books of Ukraine Bank, and maybe they knew they were forced, and they kept a blind eye, and maybe the bank was also protected up to some point, and when the protection was withdrawn, it collapsed. So
of course,
it's not a good example.
That's a bit of speculation.
But,
we don't know the fact.
but Charles, the point I was making is this.
Yes.
Why would you have Kenya with a 14% lending rate, okay, for commercial banks, and in Uganda you have upwards of 20?
But
it tells you something. Something is not right.
The Kenyans only arrived at that by legislation.
But you see,
they legislated
yeah.
that central bank rate.
I think the argument that has lately been advanced, I just try to mention, is that there's a very low saving culture in the country. And both government and private individuals are competing for the little money in commercial banks because there isn't actually enough capital that has been accumulated in the country to maybe take government to other sources of money, and then the rest of us go to the banks, and the banks have no choice but to.
And that's what I mean, by the way.
But what about
that is failure of policy?
Right.
By saying that we must leave this financial sector into the market.
Laissez-faire.
Yeah, laissez-faire. It is not possible.
But gentlemen, I also wanted to point out that NSSF has been having a problem of having too much money. You see, NSSF whose problems are... Listen. Gentlemen, listen.
This is subject to discuss.
NSSF has been having a lot of money. Those are workers' savings.
Can we pick
NSSF is the
Dr.
most
Kisa,
liquid
Dr. Kisa,
financial institution.
Can we pick this discussion up after a very short commercial break? Welcome back this last segment of this edition of the Fourth Estate, and some interesting feedback from some of our viewers. Let me start with these two. They have very, very interesting comments. Question: who owns Uganda's economy? Answer: vultures. Pun intended. That
Who is that?
That Ismail Musa Ladwe, I think he's watching us from Jinja. Another person. Question: who owns Uganda's economy? Answer: Chinese and Indians. That's from this is from Monteja Simwe. And then there is Joseph Nwabine here who says the problem with an economy is that the problem with an economy that is largely owned by non-nationals is that its survival depends on the whims of those who own it. When Bush and Blair, Bush, I believe he's referring to the former U.S. president, George Bush, and Blair he's referring to the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, attacked Iraq and Afghanistan, the Arab investors who owned billions of dollars in the United States and the United Kingdom retaliated by withdrawing their monies from European and American banks. And in turn, there was world credit crunch because those countries, the United Kingdom and the United States, couldn't even afford to give aid. So it matters who owns the economy. That's Joseph Nwabine. And then he adds, on the issue of borrowing, when China lends us, we pay 4% in 20 years. While when World Bank lends us, we pay 1% in 40 years. So why should we continue borrowing from China instead of the World Bank? Joseph Nwabine. Gentlemen, that's part of the feedback. Respond to it. Prof, let me start with you.
Well,
and Donna was talking about lack of a culture of savings, and so absence of savings to be able to bolster borrowing and reduce the interest rate.
You see, the economy and the economic policy is determined by the nature of politics that you have. Why do most Ugandans not save? They do not save mainly because they have very little to save. But secondly, even if they were to save, you need a policy framework in which you have a reasonable entity in which you can save and which is fairly guaranteed and secure. But now, if we are going to rely on these simplistic market-based institutions, SACCOs, and they are determined purely by market forces. This means that the poorest people will be forced to save on very high and harsh conditions. Therefore, if we are going to encourage Ugandans to save, you need a minimum level of government protection and regulation. And on the question of whether we borrow from China or the World Bank or any other entity, of course that is also a political decision, and it depends upon why the NRM regime chooses, for instance, to borrow at a higher interest rate from China rather than the World Bank, because China is not going to ask questions about whether there is democracy and that kind of thing. So that is a political decision, and therefore it is up to the political actors, political forces, and even the business people and everybody that benefits from a better economy to pressurize the government to make sure that whatever borrowing that we do should be in the best interest of the people of Uganda, not in the best interest of the regime.
But Professor, just before I leave you, if you see the saving and investment practices of Ugandans, I mean, Ugandans are putting 300 million, 400 million, a billion, 2 billion shillings in brick and mortar. And they're going to sleep in this brick and mortar. They're buying cars of 300 million shillings, brand new cars, and competing. And the streets are choking with all Japanese vehicles all over the place. Doesn't common sense, shouldn't common sense prevail and say you are better off trying to get this money to multiply or to grow in a fixed deposit account, in a treasury bill, in or on the stock exchange, than struggling to buy brick and mortar, and you see all this growth happening.
The thing is this: the people with so much money, maybe most of which has been stolen, which is invested in this brick and mortar you're talking about, may seem irrational, and in the end it will be self-correcting. But let's talk about the ordinary people, the middle-income earner. I think that you cannot leave this saving business to an individual. It needs, you see, the culture we are talking about does not simply arise. It needs some legal framework that gives incentives to people to do the right thing. Let me give you an example. In Kenya, they have building societies. You could have cooperative societies in which, because you, as Mwanguya, cannot have enough money to put up 5 low-cost houses, but if you are acting as 1,000 people, first of all, you'd be able to get land, you'd be able to get a loan, or you'd be able to use your own job and save in a collective, pull the money together, and be able to invest in low-cost housing, which has multiplier effect, because there are many people who can actually afford to go into those houses, and you'll be able to make money. So, if you leave everything to the market, people will try to do the quickest means to make money. That is why, for instance, people would prefer to do money lending. Okay, but it's not. It is not a way to. It's not sustainable. It's not a way to create capital.
There's no production going on.
Yes. So, but they are doing it because, given the space that they have, that is the best option, and that's what the market is providing for them. So I'm saying that this business of saying that the market is rational and everybody has proved that soccer is not rational, you need a rational intervention through government policy. Then you will see Ugandans following that intervention and saving.
Honor, you raised the argument about saving culture in this country, but Ugandans actually do save. They save in those circles, as unstructured as they are, or they might be.
And unconscionable.
Unconscionable, yes. And sometimes the circles have been spoiled because they form a circle. Not those that have formed the circle out of individual initiative, without external motivations, but their own needs, addressing their own needs, they tend to actually succeed. But those that are formed because someone is going to move around with a bag and give them some money and give them, I mean a boost, like we have seen recently, those definitely can't survive or haven't survived because they say, can we share what we have received? There is no long-term outlook. you've seen the death of the cooperative movement. Ugandans save in goats, they save in chickens, they save in most working class Ugandans think they are saving by buying a piece of land. Sometimes overpriced.
And the problem is that they are saving as individuals.
Yes.
Yes,
and land prices are overpriced because some people are stealing money and therefore trying to hide it in land and brick and mortar, so they rise up for everyone else. So how does an absence of a saving culture compare with where multinationals just put the money, wire it away?
Yeah,
and you see the trends when the dollar is
Chelsea, absolutely right, and I think Professor Barya really gets it spot on. Maybe what I should have been saying is absence of a modern or organized saving culture. And he's right that it's not going to happen in the absence of government action. In fact, I remember one time talking to one of the finance ministers and saying in my voodoo economics that isn't there a case for what I would call a National Savings Act? That Parliament needs to pass a law, you know, that somehow organizes our poor
even the middle class.
Because I believe collectively, even if you got say 1,000 shillings from every Ugandan, you'll be talking of billions, eventually trillions of shillings.
So I think
so the ability to harness from the poor in a systematic and sustainable manner through law, I think is paramount. But of course, the other big issue is some people say there is no better saving than reducing costs. I think we all agree that maybe our traditions or we are not very keen on controlling our costs as individuals. You can look at so many social costs that we incur, things like marriages. We have the most lavish marriages anywhere in the world. So those, even if you try to save, but you do not control your costs, any economist will tell you the books will not balance and you will not progress. So it's also important as a people. Many people, for example, condemn the Asian that they have taken over businesses. There are always riots downtown, but it's also agreed that the Asian people are very prudent in terms of spending and very disciplined, and they can really go on very shoestring survival in terms of how they eat, how they dress, how they do what, and it allows them to accumulate capital faster.
But I think that part of that culture was built over by the political structure and legislation. I think it was not voluntary. Let me just take a message. Rama says, thanks for the show and greetings to the panelists. So I've delivered the message. I have always said Ugandan technocrats and politicians are lazy in mind. The United States of America, which is the epitome of capitalistic world, cannot allow one person or company to own a newspaper, a TV, and a radio station. Free market is not about plucking the door out. You open and narrow it when it affects your economic interests. And then there's another viewer here who has a very interesting take. He says, Charles, you have a very good topic today, but you have decided to take historians in the theater room instead of doctors. As a result, they are not discussing the topic well. Our economy is in the hands of mafias, Ugandans and foreigners alike in collusion. Budgetary allocations may not constitute a good yardstick for sector performance because these allocations actually don't serve the intended purposes.
So he has answered the question, Uganda's economy, the mafia.
But Charlie, I wanted to just kind of re-echo what Professor Barya and Ndugu Napitu were saying earlier, that you see, in a poor country like Uganda, you need some level of fiscal coercion. There has to be some element of the state coercive apparatus aimed at deploying the meager resources you have towards priority areas of productivity. What we have today, listen.
Advocating that government should get us
from
our lives as possible.
No. That's not what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying. If you look at the history of economic development around the world, you realize that countries, especially those that come into industrialization late, they have to rely a lot on the state's capacity to control finances. And so the banking sector is very important. If you look at Eastern Europe that came into modern development late, And you look at even some West European countries like Germany that came much later, and then you look at the Asian tigers, the control over the banking sector was crucial. It was crucial because then the state can be able to make sure that credit is available and affordable. And without that, listen, without that, it means that, you see, people will be borrowing at very high rates, and so they cannot engage in long-term production. Secondly, it means that if you can't have access to credit, then for the most part, many people will not be productive. So you have a society where people are idle and disorderly. They are not being productive.
Someone, Frank Gashumba is watching us and says, who owns Uganda's economy? Vampires. Very simple and straight answer.
Well, that's not useful. Well, but it is a motive, but...
let me just twist the question a little bit around.
Yes.
What we're discussing here is information that's been available to us. Those economists at the Ministry of Finance, professionals scattered all around these government departments, academicians at Makerere and other universities, at MUBS and Busitema, from all over the country, have this information. Maybe the question is, how did we arrive here? Did we know? Was it accidental? Because we've gone through those cycles of experimentation that you talked about. Obote, attempt at nationalization, which was partial, completed by Idi Amin through his economic war. Then Obote too, that tries to liberalize the economy under SAPS. But of course that was a foreign agenda, largely the World Bank and IMF, as we were told, or the Bretton Woods institutions. Then you have President Museveni, who attempts initially to do socialist. So negotiate a deal with Tanzania, supply you transformers, and you send them bill. Negotiate another deal with someone else, supply them maize, and they send you. I think there was a deal with
there was Yugoslavia. There was an attempted one with North Korea.
Yes. Then we walk away from that and go to full-scale liberalization.
Yes.
30 years down the road, we are rethinking our full-scale liberalization and asking ourselves, how did we let a crucial sector like Uganda Airlines, for connecting a landlocked country like this, go bust?
And our bank, UCB.
Yes. How did you close Uganda Commercial Bank? But these debates were there. Professor Suruma had serious debates and disagreements over the privatization of the Uganda Commercial Bank. So did we arrive here by accident? Don't we know where we're supposed to be going? What's going on?
Yeah, let me summarize it by saying three things. One, I think it is true that the government was losing money in many of the parastatals through indiscipline and political interference. But today we have some parastatals and public enterprises which are doing well, and that is largely because they are not interfered with largely. Therefore, there is a political lesson to learn, and I think that one can say that whereas it was true that there were several mistakes in state ownership and state control, but I think if lessons have been learned, it is possible to say that there are certain things we can still do better through state regulation, state control, even state ownership. The question is, however, whether there will be sufficient political discipline to ensure that that happens, and that the political leaders are not tempted once again to use those public enterprises as a means of patronage. Because that is really the challenge. It's not that by nature public enterprises will fail. They have not failed in all countries. Okay? Then thirdly, I think that it is true that the people in finance, the people in government have this information, they see what is failing, but they have a vested interest in the market economy. There are people who have gained through it, and therefore would not easily give it up. Therefore, it will take political will and a political decision to say that the liberalized economy has been too liberalized. It needs some level of control and regulation, but that is a political question that needs a political answer.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of, a bit of debate rather, not a lot of debate, a bit of debate on a forum called Dialogue of Intellectuals on the topic that we're discussing. Let me see what I can pick from here.
But while you are searching, so
yes.
so how does the political will look? First of all, I don't necessarily believe that voluntary political will is always going to be there amidst.
I'm not saying it is voluntary.
Government. So one,
yes.
it means one, you need a very high level of civic consciousness to create governments to be on their toes, which of course happens during elections and what have you. People should pay a price for not doing the right things. That's when politicians always tend to do the right things. In the absence of that, the one which I think is quicker is that you need much more profit motive, of selfish motive. To me, is the biggest driver of competence in most of these. Even if you had,
but that is available. But that is available now. That's the position we are in.
Yes. We are not talking about the old parastatals, for example. I think if they are to be recreated, they should have,
some of them,
they should
not
have an element of at least a shareholding that will check the managers to do the right thing, not to whom it may concern. No, there should be a percentage. I mean, government should co-own and then regulate properly with others who will always be able to make sure.
I have no problem with that.
It's clear.
I have no problem with that.
But if you are going to have a Uganda Airlines,
yes,
which is just like a government department, it won't work.
I agree with you.
Okay. Agaba says. Agaba Bills is watching the show, and he says, "Charles, don't oversearch." I was searching for comments to speak. When Agaba Bills and his friends were not very happy with the panel, they're thinking we should have brought economists to discuss the economy. But the economy belongs to all of us, and everybody should be able to discuss the economy. And he says
the economy is
owned.
So now let the lazy people discuss.
Yes, he says the economy is owned by tenderpreneurs. Tenderpreneurs is the word that is being used.
Okay.
By people keep targeting tenders. Yes, and that's where they. And then another someone else here says, I am inclined to take owner's line of thinking. Who gains from the economy is more fundamental than who owns. We've seen Ugandan employers who exploit more than the so-called multinationals. I think that's a message from Alex.
That was dealt with.
Yes. Just before we bring this show to an end, I would like to, I think it would be unfair to end this show without having a brief discussion with you gentlemen, and especially Professor here, on the incident or what we saw of torture by the, allegedly by the Uganda police, especially of Mr. Byamukama of Kamwenge, and the other people arrested in line with police's investigation on the murder of Andrew Felix Kawesi, which was in March, I think March 17th. Let me start with you, Kisa. The police apparently finds itself caught between a rock and a hard place. They must provide answers about growing insecurity and about this very high-profile murder. But on the other hand, now they have been caught in a discussion over
torture.
Yes.
You know, Charles, I watched those grisly images on TV, and I thought that NTV actually should have warned the viewers about the rather disturbing images they were showing to the public.
Emma Mutaiziwa is the producer. He's a news editor in this station.
Yeah.
He's whispering into my ear, and he says there was a warning.
There was a warning.
Yes.
Okay. I did not see or hear the warning this evening when I watched the news before I left home. But I think that the police finds itself in a very precarious situation because, you see, torture used to be a big issue in this country in the 90s, especially at the behest of CMI. And somehow in the recent years, many of us had thought, you know, we are past these kinds of rather macabre actions by the security agencies. But I think it just confirms what the police is involved in. You see, the police, and I have said this on this show before, the police under Kale Kaihura has been transformed into what it should be, what it shouldn't be rather. It has been transformed into a defense and security agency such that it has to deal with these cases of trying to torture people to, to get confessions. It's not a law and order matter that they are dealing with. It's more about, political intelligence, about the kind of work that CMI used to do. And that's why CMI was at the center of torture in the 90s. Now police finds itself in the same situation.
Okay.
The other day, I think yesterday, I listened to Hassan Kasinje speaking on NTV here and saying that, Mr. Byamukama, his issues may have to do with some personal health problems, which might be possible, it might be true, but now the police can't explain that away. They have this gentleman, and those wounds have come up while the man is in their custody, so the buck stops with them.
Well, I have an opinion about that, but let me first hear from the other gentleman here. Dr. Kamunyu Muwezi says we don't have an economy that belongs to us, I guess. Yes, banana plantations and longhorn cows, those we own over 80%. The paper economy is owned by European fund managers. That's his take. Professor, on these allegations of torture by the police, to differ a little bit from what Kisa is saying, it doesn't matter. If Byamukama...
But what is your question?
No, just before I answer the question, before I put the question to you, if Byamukama had been lying in bed and had picked up bed sores, then you would say it is his medical condition.
Right, and that's what I said.
The location of his injuries. Professor, to you the question: How did police end up finding itself in this situation, especially after the discussions that the long debate and discussions that happened in this country about torture years ago? I thought that we looked like it's a chapter that had been closed and the country was moving on.
Are you saying that the police has been good? Why is it bad now? Is that the question? What is the question?
That would appear now that now that torture is being discussed in the way it is being discussed, or it is emerging the way it is emerging.
No. I think let's not confuse things. I don't think you can say that police has not been torturing people. What you can say is that if they have been torturing them, we have not been seeing the evidence. Now, with social media, because I think it began with social media, this particular one. With social media and modern technology, it is easy to see things that we were not capable of seeing yesterday. That is something you should, I think, understand. And once it has come out, it cannot be denied. Now, in the past, because of the low levels of technology and the capacity to communicate, somebody would even be killed. And government can come up and say, no, we have not killed him. You remember the Jet Mwebaze saga? They were saying, no, he is alive. But you see, if there was social media, immediately somebody would have shown. But it went on. Mr. Stephen Kavuma went on telling people, I know the man is alive. So I think it's a question of the capacity of citizens to gather information. It's not that there has been a fundamental shift. That's my thinking. Secondly, I think, which is more important, I think that the police, in my view, I at times tend to be sympathetic to the police. Because I don't think that the people, even those who do the torturing, I don't think that that's what they would want to do. I don't think that many of these people enjoy what they do. But we are in a political system that is very jittery, and when certain specific incidents happen, they panic and they want to produce quick answers. And in particular, Major General Kale Kayihura has been managing police through the media. And I've heard some police officers complaining about that method of work, because policing is not public relations. Essentially, there's an aspect of it, but it is not public relations. Somebody has committed an offense, you call cameras and you begin pulling what? Pips off his shoulders in order to show that you are effective. So, I think in the zeal to show that they are effective in trying to deal with the crime, they are unfortunately being forced to commit even more crime. And the simple foot soldiers, the ordinary policemen, are being forced to do this by their superiors. And I think that if police was more inclined to be more professional, to do intelligence work, to look for information instead of playing to the gallery, then they would not need to be forced to do these kinds of things. This is just a panic.
Just a quick one there. Are you surprised then that General Kale Kaihura got his contract renewed and quickly passed through Parliament, Public Appointments Committee?
I am not surprised because the Parliament that we have is not a Parliament that you expect to be nationalistic. It is not an independent Parliament, and therefore it will, I think, pass all the resolutions or the requests that come from the executive and particularly from the president. Because
so why
for
would the president reappoint someone who has changed the police from its core, just like you and Kisa argue?
He would reappoint him because he's doing what he wants him to do.
Torture people? Is that what you want?
No, secure him in power.
To provide security for the regime. Now, the torture is secondary to him. That is secondary. In fact, you know, in war, when big people are fighting and they kill civilians, they say it is what? Collateral damage. They don't even regard them as people.
Let's have the last one.
So unfortunately,
yes, let's have the last
people are becoming collateral damage.
I will not subtract anything. For me, I think in addition to everything else, you may say we get the police with this out. I think the fact that you have outrage about these events largely on social media, largely in the elite media, and not in the society, speaks to our societal problem as well. Remember, the society from which the police officers come from is the same society which condones mob justice in many cases. And I spoke yesterday actually to a young police officer who believes their philosophy is that somehow this is how it should be done, because the civilians are stubborn, and then add to that, they genuinely don't have the capacity to do the finer methods of
thank you.
Crime detection. So the police we get is the police we deserve.
In other words, for them a suspect is condemned.
Our time is out, we need to get out of here. Let me just take these last messages. The debate is continuing on who owns Uganda's economy. So every Ugandan should get involved in this discussion on social media platforms, NTV at Fourth Estate, NTV Fourth Estate. You can continue on Facebook, also the NTV page, and you can continue on WhatsApp groups. And I can see Dr. Kamunyi is engaging in a very interesting discussion with his friends, and he says, we don't have an economy that belongs to us, I guess, a banana plantation, and then he says, please don't confuse middlemen working for fund managers with owners. And he says, the only value you have is land, anything and anything therein, and some professional knowledge which is vulnerable since the owner might walk away. No patents, unemployment renders it redundant. And the building in town is not an economy. A cargo plane full of processed branded mango juice heading for Europe or South Sudan is an economy. I think with that we got to bring this discussion to an end. Thank you very much, Dr. Moses Kisa. Thank you very much, Hon. Peter Komole. Thank you very much, Professor John Jean Barie. Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight and always, and thank you very much, especially those of you who give us feedback, and each one who watches the show. And of course, a wonderful production team that stays up late to deliver the show to you. From me, it's a good night.